Hello everyone, this is my solution for Advent of Code 2020, day 4. So the problem is to validate some passports. Each passport must have all of these fields. These fields are things like height, eye color, expiration year for the passport, etc. So the data will be something like this. So the first step would be to parse this data into a format that is easier to work with, such as a list. So what I'm trying to do is, so for this data example, I'm trying to process it so that I have a format like this. Something, and so on. And we will have for the second passport something like IYR 2013 ECLAMB ... This is what we are trying to do. So we can first split the data into different lines, and then we can remove the white space for each line, and then so if the line it has some actual data, then let's keep track of the current lines somewhere. So let's have this array. So for example, we're reading this passport, so we append this line, then we append this line, and that's what we're doing. So we're appending the line. But else, that means that we've now encountered an empty line. So this could mean a few things. It could mean it's the first line of the file, in which case our passport would not have any data, so we should only append the passport data if we actually have data. So if the passport actually has data, then we will append it, and then we will clear our current passport data. Okay, and then when we're done, you could have a passport that you never appended to your array. So just append that passport and return the array. However, what this would return is not this format, but rather, in this example, it would return this would be your first element, and this would be your second element. So we actually need to split this line into by the spaces. So I'm just going to add another function, get fields for a passport, for line in passport fields equals to fields plus line dot split at the spaces, and return the fields. So when we're appending the passport, we want to append the passport fields. This will exactly produce this kind of list like I have shown here. So now that we've actually processed our data, part 1 is pretty simple. We have all of these required fields that we need, so I will copy them. And I'm going to store them all in a set, like so. So for each passport that we have, we're going to keep track of the fields that the passport of the fields that the passport has. So if you remember, I stored these as like with the colon still there, so I just want to split it and get the first part, which I will call the key. And then I can add that key to my set of all of the keys that the passport has. So when you're done this, you will have all of the keys that the passport has, and we want to compare that to all of the required keys that the passport needs to have. So this difference function that I'm going to use here, what this will do is if the required keys has some elements that the passport keys does not have, then this difference function will return a set with some elements. So if this set that it returns is not is empty, that's a good thing. We want it to be empty. We want it to be empty because that means that our passport keys has all of the required keys. If this thing has some data, then it's obviously not empty, and that would be a problem. So, but if this thing is empty, which is what I'm checking here, empty, we have a valid passport that has all of the fields. So I will update that, and once you do this for all the passports, you have counted how many passports are valid, and you are done. So for part 2, we have the same first part. All of the passports must have all these fields. They also need to have some additional criteria for each field. So let's just copy our solution for part 1, because part 2 will be similar. However, once we get to this part, we need to check some additional criteria. So we want to go, okay, so here currently all I was storing before is the actual keys, but I actually want to store the keys and the values. So let's change a set to a dictionary. Maybe I will call this passport dict. And so I'm going to store these like so in a dictionary. And then now when we're doing this difference, we just have to do it based on the keys. And let's assume that this passport is valid. It may not be valid after we have scanned all of the values, but for now, let's just say that it is. So for each of the keys and values in this dictionary that I created, we're going to check, is this value valid? If it is not valid, suddenly we have found a problem with our passport. It is no longer valid. Let's break. Then we're going to check if this passport is valid. It's still valid after checking all these fields. It is a valid passport. Let's add it to our count for the valid passports. Sorry, I did miss that in the first one. And then at the end, we're done. However, I have not implemented this valid pair function, so let's go ahead and do that. Now, if you're using something like regex, that would be, it may be simpler if you are good with regex. However, I am not so good with that, so we're just going to do it, I guess, the old school way. So if the key is BYR, we have a bunch of conditions. Let me actually copy these conditions down here for reference. So if it is BYR, we need it to be a 4-digit number. So first of all, it must actually be a number. So if it is not a number, this int, when you try to cast it to an int, it will throw an exception, which means that it has violated some problem. It has some problems. So let's return false. It's not valid. But so first we cast it to an int, then we check, is the int greater than 1920? And sorry, this would be 2002. Is that right? That's okay. Let's just say it's 2002. All right. That's how you validate BIR. Else, if you're trying to validate IYR, you want to check, is it an int? Is it a 4-digit int? So is it between these two boundaries? If it is, great, it is valid. Else, if it is EYR, you want to check, is it an int, and is it between those two numbers? If it is HGT, like height, you want to check, does it end with centimeters? And if it does end with centimeters, are the first 3 digits between 150 and less than 193? Sorry, I did not write that here, but there is a boundary check for that. Else, if it does not end with centimeters, we have to check that it must end with inches then, and it must be between, I think it is 59 and 76. Okay. If it is HCL, it must start with a hashtag, as I've mentioned here, and be followed by a 6-digit hexadecimal number, which you can do in Python using int with base 16. Oh, and also, sorry, it needs to be 6 digits, so you just check, like, is the length of this actually 7? Because 1 plus 6 is 7. Else, if it is, what are we, 2 left, okay, almost done. If K is ECL, then we want to check, is V one of these possible things? AMV, PLU, brown, gray, green, hazel, and other. Else, if it is, I don't know what PID is, but some ID number. Is it 9 digits? And is it a integer? And it may have trailing zeros. That's why length of V. So as trailing zeros, but when you cast it to an int, it's okay. It will just work. These are kind of the only cases. If it's not one of these fields, it could be some optional field, which is always valid, so let's just return true. So we've implemented this valid pair function, so everything will just work. So the only difference from part 1 is this additional check, which is checking every field if it's valid. So that's it for day 4. Sorry if I went a little long. This problem was a little more complicated, but yeah, thanks for watching.